Okay, in this video I'm going to quickly go through the most important parts of chapter 16. To do this, I'm just going to open up a piece of paper and talk and write. That'll be the style of all these videos. Mainly what you want to take away is, okay, that's what I thought was important from this chapter, or, oh, I should go back and look at that again. And again, these will be your guide for how to do the before class clicker quizzes. Alright, in this video we're only going to talk about chapter 16. Chapter 17 on the next topic will be in the next video. 16 specifically is about measuring GDP, and we know this now to mean gross domestic product. Alright, so what is GDP? Well, the most important thing about this is to think about its definition first. There are three important points. Okay, GDP is the market value of final goods and services in a given time period. All right, so market value, we mean usually price. We mean dollars per quantity. Final goods, we mean the final thing that rolls out the door. So if we're talking about, cars, beep beep, then this car is made out of iron. Iron is not the final good. The car is the final good. So if we had data on both iron inputs to automobile production and automobile sales, GDP would capture only the auto sales, not the material that the car is made out of. All right, so this is market value of final goods in a given period of time, and GDP is usually measured quarterly, which means break down the year into 3-month periods and measure quarter by quarter by quarter. Okay, January through March, etc. Alright, so there are a bunch of ways that the chapter talks about measuring GDP using this kind of calculus. And the first is just to measure GDP directly using prices and quantities of goods. So what we say is GDP in dollars is equal to dollars per quantity times quantity of goods. What do I mean by these units? Well, dollars per quantity is price, and quantity is just how much of the thing you have. But what we see is that by writing this more explicitly, we can cross out the Q's, get dollars, and dollars compares with dollars of GDP. Okay, so one way is to simply multiply price times quantity and add the whole thing up. So this is method 1 for calculating GDP, and we sometimes call that the direct method. Okay, the second way that the book talks about calculating GDP is using the value-added approach. And this value-added approach is a lot like this math that we were talking about, the car. What it is you have to calculate the value added at each point in a production process. So let's say that this car, the iron, cost $2 and the car sold for $4. Then the value added is only the difference, the $2 value added in the car. Okay, so that's how much value is being added to the iron by making it into a car. All right, the third point, and I'm just going to erase the screen now. You can obviously just go back in your video to look at the previous point. The third way of calculating GDP is by the expenditure approach, which is to break down GDP, and we often abbreviate GDP with Y. I'll write GDP below it. Why it became the letter Y to abbreviate GDP, I have no idea. Is equal to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. Okay, net exports, exports minus imports. All right, so the third way, they call this the expenditure approach. All right, so what you have is 3 separate ways of measuring GDP. All right, so a good way to quiz yourself on this material now is to go back into the book and find how GDP is calculated one way and try to understand how you would calculate GDP the 2 other ways. All right, that's your problem to figure out. Now, the next thing after calculating GDP through either of these 3 methods is to talk about real versus nominal. So real versus nominal, we're talking about time implicitly. So the third point, we said that GDP is the market value of final goods and services in a period of time. Real versus nominal is just where do you get your prices from? Okay, so we said that you could get GDP by calculating price of good 1 times quantity of good 1 plus price of good 2 times quantity of good 2 plus dot dot dot. All right, so if you're using prices in the same period as your x's, so the price of x1 in the year 2000 times the quantity of good 1 in year 2000, then you're talking about a nominal calculation. Okay, real is different. Real is just when you use prices in a certain base year through the whole thing. So for instance, price in year 2000, and you keep that set, but then you use X in whatever year, 2001, 2, 3, dot, 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 keeping the price in 2000 set. So real, this word real, it means set the price so that we can see how things are changing and not just how inflation is changing. Inflation is the topic of the next chapter. So go back through this video if you have to and think about these major points. Look at the book. How is GDP measured? How does that change when we think about real versus nominal? Those are the key points to take from this chapter.